He wasn't a monster on screen. But what if he was one behind closed doors? The maid hadn't spoken in years. Not to the press. Not to investigators. Not even to the other staff who used to work those long hours behind the towering wrought iron gates of the Brentwood mansion. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But after December 14th, the day Rob and Michelle Reiner were found stabbed to death, her silence shattered. And what poured out wasn't just scandal. It was the unraveling of a legend. Because Rob Reiner, the man America adored as Meathead, the director of When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride, the activist, the Hollywood icon, may have been hiding a life so chilling, so manipulative, so deeply twisted, it left the people who lived with him in daily fear. No one expected the murder. No one believed it, at first. But after the bodies were wheeled out and the headlines blared, the whispers returned. The ones that had always been there. The rumors the press ignored. The stories people were too afraid to tell. And the maid? She remembered everything. But what did she see? And why did she wait until now to tell it? Let's go back. Before the crime scene tape. Before the mugshot. Before the body count. Back to a Hollywood fairy tale with a rotting core. Because behind every perfect image is the secret someone would kill to protect. The lie we bought into. It's strange how much power we give to faces on screens. How easily we forget they're human. Flawed. Sometimes deeply broken. Rob Reiner wasn't just a Hollywood success story. He was the son of a legend, Carl Reiner, comedy royalty. He was the smiling liberal voice on CNN panels, the charming interview guest, the man with a laugh that could fill a room. But when you peeled back the red carpets and the polished interviews, you found something else. You found a man who, according to his former maid, demanded silence, loyalty, total obedience. You found a house that operated more like a fortress than a home, a staff that knew never to ask questions, a wife who, in her private journals, allegedly hinted at things she couldn't say aloud. You found a son spiraling in the guest house, and you found a daughter who, on the night of the murders, told police exactly who to look at, even before the evidence came in. So what really happened inside that $13.5 million Brentwood mansion? Why did Nick Reiner, Rob's 32-year-old son, end up in handcuffs that night? Why was Michelle Reiner found with defensive wounds on both hands, as if she had fought for her life? And what did Romy Reiner, their 27-year-old daughter, mean when she told authorities there was a dangerous family member who should be investigated? That's not something you say casually. That's not something you say unless you've seen something that no one else has. December 14th, the perfect day turns to horror. It was a Sunday. Sunny, typical California warmth. The Reiners had planned a quiet evening. Nothing extravagant. No guests, no event. Just them, Rob, Michelle, and according to police, Nick in the guest house. At some point between 8:30 and 10 p.m., neighbors heard raised voices. One reported the sound of glass shattering. Another heard what they described as a muffled scream. Nobody called the police. Not yet. By the time Romy arrived, reportedly concerned after unanswered calls, she was met with a horror scene. Her mother sprawled in the hallway. Her father in the den. Blood smeared across the floor. No sign of forced entry. No weapons in sight. But the wounds told their own story. The autopsy would later reveal multiple sharp force injuries. The manner of death? Homicide. And Nick? He was still at the property. Calm. Detached. Silent. Until the police arrived. That's when things started to shift. Fast. The headlines versus the truth. The media moved quickly. Hollywood legend murdered. Tragedy in Brentwood. Son arrested in shocking family crime. But none of the coverage, not TMZ, not Deadline, not CNN, mentioned what was coming next. They didn't mention the maid. Or what she was about to reveal. She wasn't just a bystander. She had lived in that house for 9 years. She had seen the moods, the manipulation, the things Michelle brushed off, the way Rob treated his son, and worse, the way he allegedly twisted the people around him into compliance. I've seen actors play villains better than the one I worked for, she said. But no one ever wrote a script this dark. She didn't want money. She didn't want fame. She wanted safety. Because the things she saw, the things she heard in that house, made her believe someone else might still be in danger. I don't think the story's over, she whispered. Not by a long shot. Why now? Why speak at all? It's a fair question. If she was afraid, why not speak up before? If she knew something was wrong, why stay? But if you've ever worked behind Hollywood walls, you know, silence is part of the job. NDAs are real. Loyalty is everything. And fear? Fear is the currency. According to her, staff were trained to never talk to the press. Cameras were installed in the servant quarters. Schedules were scrutinized. And Rob? He was charming when the cameras were on. But when they were off, things shifted. I saw him throw a wine glass at Michelle once, she said. Then smiled at me and asked me to clean it up like it was nothing. She didn't report it, because no one would believe her. Until now. Now, people are listening. Now, there's blood on the floor. And now, the cracks in the Reiner image are too wide to ignore. The maid's first clue, in the hidden room. There was a door in the Reiner house that the staff were never allowed to open. It wasn't the wine cellar. It wasn't a study. It wasn't even locked with a key. It was bolted. Internally. One day, early on, the maid says she caught a glimpse through that door. Just a flash. A room that didn't match the rest of the house. Soundproofed. Dark. Nothing like the polished glamour of the Hollywood estate above. She never told anyone. But she never forgot. I don't know what he kept down there, she said. But I know it wasn't good. The room would come up again later. After the murders. After police searched the property and found a single drop of blood, not belonging to any of the Reiners, near that same door. No charges were filed. No explanation given. But something doesn't add up. What's at stake in this story? You might be wondering, why should any of this matter to you? Why does it matter that a beloved Hollywood figure may have had a secret life? Why should we care what a maid says? Here's why. Because Rob Reiner wasn't just a director. He was a symbol of progressive ideals, family values, artistic integrity. He stood beside presidents. He marched for justice. He built a brand on decency. And now, that brand may have been built on a lie. If the maid is telling the truth, everything changes. Not just for Hollywood, but for the way we choose our heroes. Because if someone like Rob could fool the world, who else is hiding behind the mask? But what the maid saw next, what finally pushed her to break her silence, was something no one saw coming. And it starts with a name. One she whispered, trembling, to a friend. A name that wasn't Nick. A name that, until now, hasn't appeared in any of the reports. The guest house son. Was Nick Reiner hiding in the guest house? Or was he being kept there? That was the question the maid couldn't stop asking herself after she whispered that name to her friend. Not Rob. Not Michelle. Not Romy. Nick. Because the guest house wasn't just a place to live. It was a boundary. A line drawn in concrete and glass that separated the Reiner family from the son they no longer trusted inside the main house. And the truth is, that separation didn't start recently. It started years before the blood. Nick Reiner had not always lived behind the estate, detached from the main residence like an afterthought. There was a time when he slept under the same roof, ate at the same table, laughed in the same rooms where Rob held court with Hollywood royalty. But something changed. Slowly at first, then suddenly. And when it changed everything. The maid remembers the day Rob told her Nick would be moving out back. Those were the exact words. Not moving to the guest house. Not needing space. Moving out back. As if Nick were a problem to be relocated. Not a son to be protected. Make sure his meals are left at the side door, Rob instructed. Calm. Casual. Almost cheerful. He doesn't need to come inside unless I say so. At the time, the maid assumed it was about addiction. Rehab. Boundaries. She had seen this before in wealthy families. Shame disguised as concern. Distance masquerading as help. But this felt different. Because Rob didn't sound worried. He sounded relieved. The guest house wasn't freedom. It was containment. From the outside, the guest house looked like luxury. 2 bedrooms. A small kitchenette. A patio overlooking manicured hedges. Security cameras positioned at every angle. But inside, it felt like surveillance. Nick didn't have a key to the main house. That wasn't an accident. He had to knock. Or text. Or wait. And sometimes, no one answered. The maid saw him pacing the property late at night, circling the perimeter like a restless animal. Smoking. Muttering. Talking to himself. Other nights, he didn't come out at all. Lights off. Curtains drawn. He felt watched, the maid said. And he knew it. Because Rob liked control. Not loud control. Not obvious control. Quiet control. The kind that makes people doubt themselves. The kind that convinces a grown man that isolation is his own fault. Nick's past was complicated. But so was his father. Yes, Nick struggled. Drugs, depression, repeated stints in rehab. That much was known, at least within the family. But what wasn't known was how Rob weaponized those struggles. Every mistake Nick made became leverage. Every relapse became proof. You're unstable, Rob would say, according to the maid. You're dangerous. You need supervision. And supervision came in the form of cameras. The guest house had more cameras than the main home. That wasn't coincidence. Nick knew it. He joked about it once, darkly. Guess I'm the experiment, he said, laughing without humor. No one laughed back. The night before, everything fell apart. On the night before December 14th, something happened. Something that didn't make the news. Something that never made it into the police report. The maid remembers hearing raised voices. Not shouting, worse. That sharp, cutting tone Rob used when he wanted to wound without witnesses. She remembers Michelle crying. And she remembers Nick storming out of the main house for the last time. He slammed the door so hard a framed photo fell off the wall. Rob didn't chase him. He didn't yell. He smiled. Let him cool off, he said. That smile would haunt her later. Because that night, Nick didn't return to the guest house quietly. He paced. He shouted. He made calls. And one of those calls wasn't to a friend. It was to someone the maid had never heard Nick mention before. Someone whose name would come up again. After the murders. Sunday, December 14th. A timeline that doesn't sit right. Let's slow this down. Because timelines tell the truth when people don't. Police believe the murders occurred sometime between 8:30 and 10 p.m. But the maid insists the house was already too quiet by 8:15. No footsteps. No TV. No laughter. Just silence. Nick, meanwhile, was seen outside the guest house at 8:40 p.m. A neighbor confirmed it. He was barefoot, agitated, talking on his phone. At 9:05, security footage shows Nick entering the guest house. At 9:12, a car enters the property. That car does not belong to Nick. It does not belong to Rob. And it does not belong to Michelle. Police acknowledged the vehicle. They never explained it. Why? Romy's fear didn't come from nowhere. When Romy arrived at the estate later that night, she was already panicking. That's important, because panic doesn't appear out of thin air. It's born from pattern. Romy had been afraid for weeks. The maid says Romy had confided in her quietly, in fragments. Never full sentences. Always looking over her shoulder. I don't think it's safe anymore, Romy once said. Who? The maid asked. Romy didn't answer. But she did say one thing that never left the maid's mind. If something happens, it won't be what it looks like. That was before the blood. Before the sirens. Before Nick was arrested. Nick's arrest was too clean. When police detained Nick, there was no resistance. No fight. No breakdown. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't ask about his parents. He asked one question. Did you find it? That question is in the report. What wasn't answered is what it was. A weapon? Evidence? Something else entirely? Nick never clarified. And police never said. The maid's doubt. Here's where things start to fracture. Because the maid does not believe Nick planned this. She believes he was volatile. Yes. Angry. Yes. Capable of violence? Maybe. But calculated murder? She hesitates. Nick was impulsive. Sloppy. Emotional. The crime scene wasn't. The wounds were precise. The house was wiped clean in certain areas and left untouched in others. That's not rage. That's intention. So who had intention? And who had access? The guest house wasn't the only place Nick was kept out of. There were rooms in the main house Nick never entered. Rooms Rob guarded fiercely. The basement. The study. And one room upstairs Michelle called off-limits. Nick once tried to force his way into the study. Rob lost control. Not yelling. Not screaming. Something colder. He grabbed Nick by the collar and whispered something so quietly no one else heard it. Nick went pale. He backed away. And he never tried again. What was said in that moment? And why did Nick start sleeping with the lights on afterward? The night, everything changed. At 9:58 p.m., Romy calls 911. Her voice shakes. She tells the operator there's been an incident. She says there's blood. She says her parents aren't responding. And then she says something that doesn't air on the news. There's someone in this family you need to look at. The operator asks who. Romy pauses. Long enough to hear her breathing. Long enough to hear someone else in the background. Then she says a name. The name was redacted. But according to the maid, Romy told her later. And it wasn't Nick. The question no one wants to ask. So let's ask it. If Nick was being watched, who was doing the watching? If Rob feared Nick, why keep him so close? If Michelle was writing warnings, who were they meant for? And if Nick wasn't the monster everyone thinks he is, then why did someone want him to look like one? Because one thing is certain. The guest house wasn't just where Nick lived. It was where the story was supposed to end. But it didn't. Because what the maid discovered next, buried in security logs and whispered conversations, would tear apart everything we think we know about that night. And it leads directly to her. To the silence. To the first secret she ever kept for Rob Reiner. And once you hear it, nothing about this case will feel the same again. He called her Sunshine. That was the nickname Rob Reiner gave the maid when she first started. Not her real name. Not her preference. Sunshine. As if her job wasn't to clean up the mess, hide the cracks in the foundation, and pretend the household ran smoothly even when it was suffocating behind the scenes. But Sunshine obeyed. At first. Until the light started to fade. Until she saw too much. Until the name no longer felt warm, but like a leash. He wasn't loud. He was calculated. Everyone expected screaming. Everyone assumed that if Rob Reiner had a dark side, it would be explosive, visible, loud. But the maid said no. It was colder than that. He wasn't a yeller, she said. He didn't need to raise his voice. That would give him away. What he did was quieter, slower. It chipped at you over time. Like erosion. A joke that cut a little too deep. A compliment that came with a condition. A warning masked as advice. And if you resisted, he didn't fire you. He broke you. He made you want to leave, so he didn't have to push. The kitchen was where it started. It was always the same. The house staff knew to avoid the kitchen around 3 p.m. That's when Rob came down for his afternoon tea. Michelle often sat with him. Sometimes Romy joined. Nick? Rarely. The maid remembered one afternoon in particular. A mug shattered. Not dropped, thrown. It landed near the fridge and shattered across the floor like a thunderclap. Silence. Then Rob's voice. I told you to keep that boy out of here. He didn't yell. He whispered. His hand was still clenched. Michelle didn't say a word. Neither did Romy. The maid swept up the pieces. Her hands trembled for an hour. The staff manual was 41 pages long. Yes, there was a manual. Printed. Bound. Signed upon hiring. 41 pages of rules, expectations, and legal disclaimers. Most of it was standard. But pages 18 through 25? That's where the house changed. Never speak to guests unless spoken to first. Do not enter the West Wing after 8 p.m. Never, under any circumstances, ask about Mr. Reiner's schedule. All medication containers must be locked away after use. Weight medication? Yes. That clause appeared twice. Once under general duties. Once again under emergency protocol. The maid said she never saw what the medication was. But she knew what it did. One night, she found Rob unconscious on the floor of the den. Michelle was on the phone, her hands shaking. It's happening again, she said. Get the other pills. The ones from the safe. The safe? There was a safe? That was the first time the maid realized something darker might be in motion. And that Michelle might be hiding something, too. The first real warning came from a butler. His name was Thomas. Older. British. Impeccably dressed. He lasted for months. One day, he left a note in the break room, wedged behind the microwave. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It read, He isn't who you think he is. And she knows it. The daughter is scared. The son is too far gone. Be careful. He was gone the next morning. No resignation. No goodbye. The house staff were told he had a family emergency. No one asked questions. Except the maid. She never stopped wondering what Thomas saw. Years later, she'd realize. He was trying to warn her. Michelle wasn't just a victim. She was an enabler. This part's hard to say, but the maid was clear. Michelle wasn't oblivious. She wasn't trapped. She participated. Willingly. Maybe not at first. But over time, something changed. She started talking like him. The maid said. Same cadence. Same passive-aggressive digs. Same rules. She told me once. In this house, there's no such thing as privacy. Only privilege. And who decided who had privilege? Rob. Always Rob. Even Romy once said, quietly, I miss my mom. She's still here, but not really. So what happened to Michelle? Was she broken down? Rebuilt? Or was she complicit? That's a question the maid never answered. Because one day she got her own test. Don't be a problem, sunshine. It was late. Near midnight. She had stayed longer than usual. Rob's dinner had run late. Guests. Loud voices. Laughter. Then everyone was gone. Rob stood in the kitchen. Alone. Drinking. He looked at her, not drunk, but focused, and said, "You like it here?" She nodded. "You've been good. I hope you stay good." Then he walked past her and whispered, "Don't be a problem, sunshine." That was it. No threat. No smile. Just silence. The next day, 2 security cameras were added near the service entrance. Coincidence? Or a reminder? The maid didn't ask. But from that moment forward, she kept a journal. She started documenting everything. Because she knew, one day, someone would need the truth. The whispers between Michelle and Romy. There were moments. Tiny, fragile, almost invisible cracks in the facade. Romy and Michelle sitting in the garden, huddled close. Speaking in half-sentences. "I can't keep pretending," Romy once said. "It's not safe to stop," Michelle replied. The maid only caught fragments. But she heard something else, something she would never forget. "Romy, he said he's going to do it." Michelle, "Then we make sure he doesn't." He. Who was he? Nick? Rob? Someone else? That conversation happened 2 weeks before the murders, and the maid remembered it word for word. Because 2 days later, Romy left a note on the counter. Just 5 words. "Do you have the tape?" The first tape. Yes, there were tapes. Not security footage. Audio. The maid had installed a recording device in her cleaning cart. Why? Because she was afraid. Because she didn't trust what she saw anymore. Because she needed proof. The first tape was from a hallway conversation. Muffled. Low. But clear enough. Rob to Michelle. "If he touches that door again, I'll make sure it's the last thing he ever does." Michelle. "We need to talk to someone. This is getting worse." Rob. "No one is coming. No one's listening." That was 3 days before the double homicide. Why she stayed quiet. Until now. You might wonder, why hold this in? Why wait? Why let years go by in silence? The maid said it wasn't just fear. It was strategy. "You don't survive in houses like this by being loud," she said. "You survive by staying invisible." But after December 14, she realized something terrifying. She was never invisible. Rob had known. He had always known. She found her journal moved. Pages missing. The small recording device crushed under her cleaning cart. And one photo, a Polaroid from years ago, pinned to the wall inside the guest house. It showed the maid, bent over, cleaning near the study. A shadow stood in the doorway behind her. That shadow wasn't Rob. Wasn't Michelle. Wasn't Nick. So who was it? But it wasn't the tape that broke her. It was a single page from a journal she didn't know Michelle had kept. It was given to her anonymously. Folded. Taped shut. One line scrawled across the top. "If something happens to me, show this to the maid." Inside, a name. The same name Romy whispered on the 911 call. Not Nick. Not Rob. Someone else. Someone who hadn't been arrested. Someone still walking free. And someone who may have been inside the house that night. But what that name unlocks takes us deeper than anyone was prepared to go. And it all begins with the locked door in the basement. What was behind that door? It wasn't just a basement. Not in the traditional sense. It wasn't used for storage. It didn't hold wine racks or forgotten Christmas decorations. It wasn't dusty or unfinished. It was sealed. Intentionally. Repeatedly. Obsessively. And according to the maid, no one, not even Michelle, was allowed inside. So the question remains. Why would someone spend years living in a $13.5 million Brentwood mansion, guarding one locked room? And more terrifyingly, what happens when someone breaks that rule? You are never to enter that room. That was rule number 1. Not in the staff manual. Not written down. Spoken. Rob himself gave the order to every housekeeper who walked through the front door. Firmly. Quietly. Without explanation. The door itself was hidden behind an old bookshelf at the end of a hallway off the west wing. Most guests didn't even know it existed. But the staff did. The maid had dusted that bookshelf 100 times. She'd seen the tiny digital lock, the magnetic seal, the warning beep if anyone lingered near it too long. Once, she reached for a fallen book and the alarm sounded. Rob was there in under a minute. "You don't belong here," he said. Not angry, just sharp, like a blade. And then he smiled, adjusted her name tag, and walked away. The moment chilled her more than any shouting ever could. A house built on secrets. It was a beautiful home. Spanish Revival architecture. Archways, marble countertops, skylights, gold fixtures. But the design had one flaw, or rather, one intention. The west wing was disconnected, almost like a separate wing of a hotel. It had its own security system, separate circuit box, different heating controls, and the only entrance to the basement was through that wing. Coincidence? The maid didn't think so, because nothing in the Reiner house was a coincidence. Rob didn't like accidents. He liked control. He liked compartments. The day the door was left ajar, it only happened once. It was a stormy afternoon. Wind, rain, rare in Brentwood. Thunder echoed through the hills. The maid had come in through the side entrance. Power had flickered briefly. Systems had reset. And the lock? It had glitched. Not open. Not accessible. But ajar. Just enough for her to see. Just enough to glimpse the edge of what hid inside. And what she saw didn't make sense. It wasn't a storage room. It wasn't even a private theater, which had been her first assumption. It looked more like a recording studio. Soundproof walls. Heavy insulation. A tall leather chair in the center of the space, bolted to the floor. Monitors. Wires. A long table with medical instruments. And cameras. Not security cameras. Tripods. Lighting kits. A red rec sign above the far wall. And then, the moment that made her heart stop, a child-sized mannequin strapped to the chair. Turn around. Now. It was Rob. His voice didn't tremble. He didn't shout. He simply stood at the end of the hallway, drenched from the rain, holding a glass of wine like it was any other day. You weren't meant to be here, he said. She stammered, apologized, but her body froze. The image of the mannequin burned into her mind. He walked toward her slowly, still sipping the wine. Then he gently pushed the bookshelf shut. Beep. Click. Lock. I'd hate for this to be your last day, he whispered. Then he smiled and walked away. Why would a director build a private studio in a basement? That's the question, isn't it? Rob Reiner had access to world-class studios. He could shoot anything, anywhere. Why build one in his home? Why hide it? Why keep it sealed? And why, according to the maid, was it used mostly at night? She once overheard Rob on the phone with someone named Ellis. The only words she caught were, "No, not the guest house. That room. The quiet one." And later, "Don't worry. They won't remember a thing." Was it part of a project? A film? A private therapy space? A twisted obsession? She never found out. Because after that night, the door was reinforced. Steel bolts. Facial recognition lock. And a new rule. No staff in the West Wing after sunset. Romy's breakdown. One day, the maid found Romy sitting outside the basement door. Alone. Eyes red. Knees pulled to her chest. "You shouldn't be here," the maid said gently. Romy didn't look up. "He told me that's where dreams go to die," Romy whispered. The maid asked who. Romy just shook her head. She never spoke of it again. But she never went near that hallway either. Not once. Not after that night. Nick's curiosity was dangerous. Nick had tried, more than once, to get into the room. He had found the original keycard in his father's office. At least, that's what he told the maid. He showed it to her. A matte black card with a gold chip and a number scratched into the corner, number 41. "I don't care what's in there," he said. "I just want to know why they're so afraid of it." But the door rejected the card. Twice. On the third try, the alarm tripped. Rob was livid. Not yelling. Not screaming. But cold. He cut Nick's access to the main house entirely after that. Nick started drinking again within days. And the maid? She stopped leaving her journal in the house. One time, Michelle tried to speak up. It was during a lunch. Quiet. Tense. Rob had stepped out to take a call. Michelle leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to get out of here," she said. The maid blinked. "I mean it. If he finds out what you saw." She stopped. Footsteps. Rob returned, smiling. "Ladies," he said. "Everything okay?" Michelle smiled. "Perfect," she said. And from that day forward, she never spoke to the maid again. Not once. The night of the murders, the door was open again. Police never mentioned it in the report. But the maid, who returned to the house a few days later to retrieve her things, noticed something strange. The West Wing was unlocked. The bookshelf had been pushed aside. And the basement door? Wide open. No sign of force. No tools. No broken glass. Just open. Inside, the chair was gone. The mannequin was gone. The wires were pulled. The tripod's missing. And on the floor, a single Polaroid photo. Face down. She picked it up with a gloved hand. It showed Rob, sitting in the chair, eyes closed, smiling. Behind him, in the shadow, a figure, too blurry to identify, but tall, male, and holding what looked like a scalpel. What was the basement really used for? If you're asking that now, you're not alone. The maid has asked herself that every night since. The photos, the recordings, the mannequin, the locked door, the secrecy, the fear. She doesn't know. Not fully. But she believes it was more than a studio, more than a storage space. She believes it was a ritual, a performance, a place where Rob became someone else, where control went from private manipulation to something darker, something physical. And now, with the room empty, with Rob and Michelle dead, the question isn't just what was in the basement. It's who else knew about it, because that Polaroid? It was dated 3 days before the murders, and the figure in the background wasn't Nick. But what came next would make even the maid question whether she'd ever truly been safe in that house. How do you cry for help when everyone around you is pretending everything's fine? That's the question Rob Reiner seemed to live with every day of her life. She had the last name, the Hollywood pedigree, the red carpet appearances, the famous dad who was friends with Spielberg and got her backstage at any event she wanted. But inside the house, inside that Brentwood mansion where secrets lived like shadows, Romy was not a star. She was a witness, a prisoner, and maybe a whistleblower. Because in the days leading up to the double murder, Romy wasn't just afraid. She was trying to warn people. She just wasn't loud enough. I can't breathe in that house. That's what she told a friend via text, 3 nights before the murders. Screenshots later leaked to a tabloid showed a partial thread. Her friend had asked if she was attending the Critics' Choice event with her parents. Romy's reply? No way. Not going back in there. Why? Because if I do, I might not come out. The friend brushed it off. A joke, probably. A melodramatic quip from someone raised in the entertainment world. But it wasn't a joke. It was a cry, and no one answered it. The first break in her composure. According to the maid, Romy had always been a little quiet, but kind. The kind of girl who smiled politely to staff, avoided conflict, and retreated into headphones more often than conversations. But something shifted in the final months before the murders. She stopped smiling. She started flinching at sudden sounds. One day, the maid found her in the library, staring at a locked cabinet. Her eyes were red. She looked sleep-deprived. Are you okay? The maid asked. Romy turned slowly. You ever feel like everyone around you is acting in a movie, and you're the only one who doesn't have the script? The maid didn't know what to say. Before she could answer, Romy whispered, I think he's going to do it. The maid asked, do what? Romy shook her head. It doesn't matter. No one ever believes me. The journal entry that changed everything. Romy kept a journal. Not a cute, pink diary with lock and key. No, a black composition book with torn edges, wrapped with a hair tie. The maid saw it once on the kitchen counter, half open, during her morning cleaning shift. One line stood out. What happens when the cameras go dark? Beside it was a crudely drawn sketch of a house, with eyes in every window. And in the basement, a black square. The only space without eyes. That entry haunted the maid, because Romy was trying to say something without saying it. And now it was too late. Or maybe, just maybe, she left something behind. The cryptic call to her aunt. This was never made public, but a family friend leaked part of it. The night before the murder, Romy allegedly called her aunt, Rob's sister. She left a voicemail. It lasted exactly 37 seconds. The contents were never fully released, but the source quoted parts of it. Something is wrong. I'm not crazy. He told me if I open my mouth again, I'll never speak another word. She didn't name who he was, but the implication was clear. Someone inside that house, someone close, was threatening her. And she believed them. A photo hidden in a shoebox. The maid discovered it while helping police catalog Romy's bedroom after the murders. Tucked inside a shoe box beneath a pile of old scripts and headshots was a single printed photo. Grainy. Dark. It showed the basement hallway, just outside the sealed door. And in the corner, the unmistakable silhouette of Rob Reiner, dragging what looked like a rolled-up carpet. Behind him, barely visible, Nick. Staring. Not helping. Just watching. Was Romy being gaslit? Or was she the only one seeing clearly? That's the tragic contradiction. To outsiders, Romy had everything. Famous last name, access, talent. But inside that house, she was unraveling. Friends noticed. Her boyfriend at the time, who asked to remain anonymous, said, "She'd text me things like he's following me, or I heard the voices again." But when I asked for details, she'd go silent for hours, or deny she ever said it. Was that paranoia? Or trauma? Or both? Because here's the thing. People who are trapped inside psychological warfare often sound paranoid. They sound unstable. That's the point. That's how abusers win. And in Romy's case, she had nowhere to run. Romy's breaking point. The night of the scream. 1 week before the murders, a scream was heard in the middle of the night. The neighbors heard it. The staff heard it. Police were never called. The next morning, Romy had a black eye. She claimed she tripped getting out of bed. The maid didn't believe her. No one did. But no one asked questions. Because questions were dangerous in that house. Because Rob had a way of making people forget what they saw. He had a way of rewriting reality. Her therapy notes were redacted. Romy had been in therapy since she was a teenager. After the murders, police subpoenaed her records. But several pages were redacted. Even her therapist, when reached by investigators, offered only a one-line summary. Romy expressed chronic fear of being surveilled, punished, and misunderstood. 3 words appeared in bold under notes: paranoia, control, isolation. What do those words describe? A mental illness? Or a household? The 911 call. What she really said. Now let's talk about the call. 9:58 p.m. Romy dials 911. Her voice is panicked, but not incoherent. She tells the dispatcher, "I found them. They're on the floor. I don't know if they're breathing." Then, just moments later, "Please send someone. Please. I knew this would happen." Then, "There's someone in this family you need to talk to." The dispatcher asks for a name. She hesitates. "I can't say it. Not on the phone." She whispers something. "We don't know what." The transcript redacted it, but the maid believes she knows who it was. Because Romy had only whispered one name to her, months earlier. And it wasn't Nick. It was someone far more protected. Someone with no fingerprints on the murder weapon. Someone whose name, for now, remains buried. Romy disappears from the spotlight. After the arrest, Romy vanished. No press statements. No interviews. No public memorials. Her social media accounts were wiped within 48 hours. Some say it was for privacy. Some say it was trauma. But others? Others think she was silenced. Because Romy knew too much. And she had already said just enough to make someone nervous. One last confession, sent via voicemail. 10 days after the murders, a voicemail arrived on the maid's phone. Unknown number. Blocked ID. It was Romy's voice. Shaky. Soft. A whisper. "I remember now. I remember everything. And I know who did it. But if I tell them, I die next. You still have the journal, right? Please. Don't let them rewrite this." Click. That was it. The maid hasn't heard from her since. But she kept the voicemail. And what she did next would risk her life. Because she took the journal, and she opened the safe. The one hidden behind the portrait in Rob's study. And inside, she found something that cracked the case wide open. But what she found inside wasn't just evidence, it was a video. And once she pressed play, there was no going back. He was America's favorite dad. That's how the world saw him. Rob Reiner, the lovable meathead from All in the Family, the witty, socially conscious director, the man who made us cry with Stand By Me and laugh with The Princess Bride. He stood for compassion, liberal values, artistic freedom. But behind closed doors, behind the walls of that Brentwood mansion, he was something else entirely. Because when the cameras weren't rolling and the lights weren't flattering him, Rob Reiner's smile turned into something colder. Sharper. The maid saw it. So did Michelle. And according to the staff, his private rage was worse than anything they'd ever witnessed. "Don't talk to me like I'm your fan." The first time the maid heard Rob snap, she thought he was joking. It was a Sunday morning. Michelle had made a small joke about how Rob always edited conversations in real life like he did in film. A harmless jab. Playful. But Rob didn't laugh. His voice dropped. His jaw tensed. "Don't talk to me like I'm your fan." The room went silent. Michelle looked like she'd been slapped. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Low. Controlled. "Icy. You know who I am," he added. Then he took his coffee and left the room. From that day forward, the maid said Michelle never joked in public again. The dinner party incident. There was a story the maid used to tell quietly, almost like a ghost story. It was about a dinner party in 2020. A private gathering. No press, no paparazzi. Just a few high-powered friends. An actor, a former senator, and a Netflix executive. The wine flowed. The music played softly. At one point, Rob raised a toast. To truth, he said. To the courage to tell it. Everyone clapped. Then, as the toast ended, Michelle reached across the table and said something barely audible. The maid didn't hear it, but Rob did. His glass slammed down. The sound cracked through the table like a whip. His face went white-hot with anger. He stood up. Everyone froze. Then, just like that, he smiled. Sat back down. Let's not pretend we all like each other, he said with a chuckle. The guests laughed nervously, but Michelle didn't. Her hand trembled the rest of the night. Behind closed doors, the real director emerged. The man who directed some of the most heartfelt scenes in cinema had a gift for manipulation. Not just on film, in real life. According to multiple staffers, Rob had a routine. Praise in the morning, coldness by noon, control by dinner, punishment by silence. He didn't scream. He withdrew. He made you invisible. And when he spoke again, you felt grateful, even if what he said was cruel. He was the king of psychological warfare, one former chef said. You didn't know you were drowning until he handed you a towel. The dog incident. It was just a dog. A small French bulldog named Buster. Romy had begged for him for years. Finally, Rob relented. But Buster barked. A lot. One night, the maid heard shouting from the backyard. Not yelling. A single voice. Low. Furious. When she got there, Rob stood with the dog's collar in his hand. Buster was shaking in the corner. I told him once, Rob muttered. That's all he needed. From that night forward, Buster never barked again. Not once. And Romy? She stopped asking for anything. Michelle's silent signals. Michelle Reiner had a way of communicating without words. A tap of the finger. A glance. A flinch. The maid learned to read them. One day, Rob came home early. Michelle was in the sitting room, reading. The moment she heard the door open, her posture changed. She placed her book down precisely, stood up, checked her reflection, smiled. The transformation was instant. Rehearsed. As if she'd practiced it. And maybe she had. Because when Rob entered the room, he looked at her and said, Good girl. Like she was a child. The maid never forgot that moment. It wasn't just control. It was ownership. You're lucky to be here. Rob told the maid that once. After she had asked for an extra day off. Not rudely. Not with entitlement. Just a quiet request. He stared at her for a long time. Then said, You're lucky to be here. Most people would kill to work for me. She nodded. But inside, she realized something. He wasn't threatening her job. He was reminding her. She was disposable. Replaceable. And if she didn't fall in line, someone else would. The knife incident, a warning? This part stayed hidden until after the murder. But the maid remembered it vividly. Months before the killings, during a small family dinner, Rob insisted the staff remove all the steak knives from the table. We're eating pasta, he said. Use spoons. Everyone laughed. Michelle raised an eyebrow. Are we expecting a food fight? Rob's response. Just want to make sure no one gets hurt. The tone was odd. Dead serious. And when Nick arrived late, Rob gave him a spoon. Nothing else. No plate. No glass. Just a spoon. Everyone stared. No one said a word. Nick left the table 5 minutes later. Nick's rage wasn't born in a vacuum. You've heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people. But in this case, it's more accurate to say, controlled people explode. Nick wasn't born angry. He was born under pressure. Constant surveillance. Constant comparison. You'll never be like your father, Rob once told him in front of the staff. Nick didn't reply. He just walked away. But 2 nights later, he broke a mirror in the guest house. Cut his hand. Said it was an accident. But was it? Or was it a scream he couldn't vocalize? A scream his father had trained out of him? The hidden phone recordings. After Rob's death, Romy gave investigators access to an old iCloud backup. Inside, audio files. Mostly innocuous. But one stood out. A 37-minute recording of Rob pacing his study, talking on the phone. Angry. Ranting. You think I don't see what they're doing? Michelle's been looking for excuses. Nick's watching me like I'm the problem. He's the one with the history. I built this family. I won't let them tear it down. A pause. Then, if she opens her mouth again, I'll finish it myself. The date? 3 days before the murders. The final argument. Witnesses said there was shouting on the night of the murder. Not screams, not chaos, but a rising argument. Short, explosive, contained. The maid, who lived nearby, said she heard Rob's voice. Louder than usual. Then silence. Then a single word. No, not shouted. Spoken like a command. Then nothing. By the time Romy arrived, it was already too late. The blood was dry. The body's cold. And the man who once controlled every frame of his public life had finally lost control of his private one. But just when it seemed the truth was closing in, a new figure emerged. Not family, not staff. Someone from Rob's past. Someone with a grudge. Someone who had been in that house and had their own key. She smiled in every photo. That's what made it so hard to believe. Michelle Reiner, graceful, loyal, always at Rob's side, was the quiet constant in a stormy Hollywood life. Where Rob was outspoken, loud, and larger than life, Michelle stayed behind the scenes. But she was always there. To the outside world, she was the picture of devotion. The long-suffering wife of a genius director. A partner in every sense. But inside that house, inside the walls that now hold bloodstains and silence, she was documenting everything. Because long before the double homicide, Michelle was already preparing for something much darker. The discovery that changed the case. The police didn't find the journals. Romy did. She discovered them 3 days after the murders, when she returned to the house under police supervision to gather some personal items. They were hidden beneath the floorboards of her parents' walk-in closet, wrapped in plastic, labeled only with dates. Each journal, 12 in total, chronicled events over a span of 5 years. Not every day, only the moments Michelle thought mattered. Moments of fear, control, and warnings. Real, chilling warnings. That now, in the aftermath of her death, read like a trail of breadcrumbs, leading straight to her killer. Today he watched me sleep. That was one of the first lines. Dated April 2nd, 2019. Michelle described waking up in the middle of the night to find Rob sitting at the foot of the bed. He wasn't touching her. He wasn't speaking, just watching. When she asked what he was doing, he replied, "Sometimes I forget who you are." She didn't ask what he meant. But that moment became the first entry in what she called the Red Book, a nickname she wrote in code. Because Michelle knew, if anyone found the journals before she was ready, it could cost her everything. She feared for her life, but not from Nick. This is where the contradiction gets ugly. In public, Rob and Michelle often blamed Nick for chaos. They spoke of his instability, his recovery, his rage issues. But in her journals, Michelle wrote something different. Nick's anger is the result of what he's seen, not the cause of it. She described moments when Rob pushed Nick beyond his emotional limits, baited him into reacting, gaslit him into doubting his own memories. Nick screamed once when Rob cornered him during a dinner, Michelle wrote. But what I'll never forget is that Rob laughed. He actually laughed. That wasn't concern. That wasn't a father protecting his son. That was a man enjoying the unraveling. Romy knew, and tried to intervene. Multiple entries mention Romy's quiet rebellion. She asked Michelle if she could tell someone. A therapist, a journalist, a lawyer. But Michelle always answered the same way. We don't have proof. And Rob has more friends than we have time. In one entry, Michelle detailed a night when Romy tried to sneak into the study and photograph papers locked in Rob's filing cabinet. She failed. Rob found out. And for 2 weeks, Romy wasn't allowed to leave the property alone, even to go to the pharmacy. He claimed it was about safety, but Michelle knew better. She wrote, "We live in a beautiful prison, and he holds the only key." The entry from the day before the murders. This one is the most haunting, dated December 13th. He knows I know. That's the first line. Michelle had grown more paranoid in the weeks leading up to her death. Her writing became jittery, uneven. Some entries were scribbled across napkins and receipts, later taped into the books. She describes hearing footsteps outside the study late at night, when she knew everyone was asleep. She describes Rob whispering into the phone in the middle of the night. "It's going to be this weekend. I've waited long enough." She thought she was being paranoid. But she also began giving away jewelry. She called her sister and apologized for a fight they'd had 6 years ago. She gave the maid an envelope marked, "For when the time is right." That envelope contained the code to the safe in Rob's office. She was preparing for something. but she didn't know she wouldn't survive it. The safe. What was inside? When the maid opened the safe after the murders, she found several old scripts, all unproduced, a 9mm pistol, unloaded, a small black USB drive, a single handwritten letter addressed to Michelle with no stamp or envelope. The letter read, "If you ever open this, then I failed. But if you show anyone what's in that file, they'll know. They'll all know." Rob's handwriting. But who was the they? The police? The press? The family? Or someone else? Because the USB? It contained video. Raw. Grainy. Night vision quality. And it wasn't footage from the house. It was from the basement. The basement footage. Michelle was there. The video is 28 minutes long. Michelle appears in the frame. Not restrained. Not terrified. But helping. Assisting. She hands Rob a file. She checks lighting. She moves behind the camera. Whatever was happening in that room, the soundproofed, hidden room beneath their home, Michelle was involved. And then something changes. At minute 1842, she walks off camera. Rob continues speaking. He's talking to someone else in the room. Someone off screen. And then he says, "Now, let's see if you remember this time." A scream follows. Not hers. A man's. Young. The video cuts to black. What did Michelle help cover up? The journals suggest Michelle knew everything. But they also show her guilt. Her slow unraveling. Her attempts to protect her children while remaining trapped in Rob's web. She considered leaving him multiple times. But she wrote, "If I leave, he keeps them. If I stay, maybe I can delay the inevitable." He's already started replacing reality with his version of it. We're all just characters now. And he's directing us to the grave. Those words now read like prophecy. And the most disturbing entry of all. Written with shaky hands. 3 days before her death. "I think he plans to kill me. But if he doesn't, someone else will." Why wasn't this shared with police? Romy turned over some journals. But not all. The maid believes Romy held back the most damning evidence. Not to protect herself, but to buy time. Because Romy believes someone else is watching. Someone connected to Rob's past. A figure who hasn't been named in any police report. Not yet. But whose presence haunts every corner of that house. Because in the margins of one final entry, Michelle scribbled a single name. Not Rob. Not Nick. Not Romy. A name no one recognized. Until the maid remembered a locked file on the USB labeled only Ellis. And what she found inside would lead to the most shocking revelation of the case. A connection no one expected. A secret Rob thought he'd buried forever. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The soft hum of distant traffic. A sprinkling of wind rustling the trees. The buzz of security lights flicking on near the driveway. And then, silence. Thick. Heavy. Waiting. Because something happened inside that Brentwood mansion on December 14th. Something that began long before the blood and ended in screams that no one heard in time. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was a performance. A script played out with deliberate beats. And someone made sure there would be no audience. No witnesses. No survivors, except one. 8:17 p.m., a knock. A door opens. That's where the official police timeline begins. The maid's testimony, supported by partially recovered camera footage, places Michelle Reiner in the hallway near the study at 8:17 p.m. She opened the front door. Who she let in? Unknown. The entry camera had been disabled. Not turned off, disabled. Later investigation showed the wiring had been cut. From inside the wall, the last image captured by the camera, a silhouette. Tall. Thin. Wearing a hooded jacket. Timestamp. 8:16 and 42 seconds p.m. Then static. And darkness. 8:30 p.m. Security glitch. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the smart home security system registered a forced reboot. Again, not a power outage. Not a glitch. A manual reset from the central control panel, located in the basement. The same basement that had been sealed shut for years. The same basement Michelle had apparently entered earlier that day. Who initiated the reboot? Still a mystery. But what followed was chaos. Except you'd never know it from the outside. 8:37 p.m., the scream. One neighbor, 2 houses down, later told detectives she heard a scream, short and sharp, like someone being startled. She didn't call the police. She assumed it was a TV playing. The scream was never mentioned on the news. But the maid confirmed it. She was returning home from her second job that night, when she passed by the Reiner property. She paused at the corner, her usual shortcut, and saw lights flickering in the west wing. Then she heard it. Not loud, not prolonged, just one sound. Sharp, sudden, like the moment someone realizes it's too late. 8:45 p.m., lights out in the guest house. Nick's phone pinged a text message to a number later identified as a former rehab sponsor. The message read, "I need out. Tonight. I mean it this time." That was the last outgoing message from his phone before police arrived. What happened after? A blackout. Literally. At 8:46 p.m., power was cut to the guest house. Not the main house. Just Nick's quarters. Deliberately. Circuit 7 on the Reiner breaker board, labeled GHPWR, was manually flipped. Nick later claimed he thought it was a storm. But there was no storm. Only a hand. A decision. And a plan. 9:02 p.m., the first strike. This part is reconstructed from blood pattern analysis and coroner's reports. Michelle was attacked in the hallway, near the stairwell. The first wound was to her left arm, a defensive wound. She saw it coming. She tried to block it. The attacker struck again, 4 times in quick succession. Each strike precise. Measured. This wasn't a wild attack. This was surgical. She collapsed near the antique bench. A trail of blood smeared along the wall shows she tried to crawl. She never made it. 9:06 p.m., Rob's final words? Rob was found in the den, slumped in the leather chair where he took his evening whiskey. The drink was untouched. Still full. The TV was on, paused on a screen from The American President, a film Rob directed in 1995. There was no sign of struggle, until you looked closer. His jaw was broken, likely from a blunt force trauma before the stabbing. He was hit. Hard. Disoriented. Then stabbed, twice in the chest. The weapon entered clean. Deliberate. And here's the most chilling part. His hand was still holding the remote. Like he never even saw it coming. 9:12 p.m. A car enters the property. Security logs show the side gate opened. Not by code, but by manual override, using a master key card labeled Ellis. The maid later confirmed she'd seen that name once. On an invoice. A contract from over a decade ago. A security consultant Rob had hired briefly, then fired under confidential circumstances. Why was the card still active? Why was it used that night? And why has Ellis never appeared in a single public police statement? 9:17 p.m., Romy returns. The cameras flick back online at 9:17 p.m. Footage shows Romy pulling up in her black SUV, headlights catching the edge of the fountain. She walks to the front door, tries the handle. It's locked. She knocks. Waits. No answer. She uses her key. Steps inside. 7 seconds pass. Then she runs back out, screaming. Phone in hand. She's on with 911 before she even gets to the driveway. Please, please, my parents. There's blood everywhere. I think they're dead. Oh my God. I told you. I told you this would happen. The call cuts briefly as she falls to the ground, still clutching the phone. Officers arrive 8 minutes later. But by then, the killer is gone. The knife that wasn't there. 2 wounds. 2 victims. 1 presumed weapon. But only 1 knife was recovered. Found in a trash bin near the west side of the house. Cleaned. No fingerprints. No blood. Just sterile steel. As if someone wiped it before using it. Or, as if it wasn't the real weapon at all. The maid believes it was a plant. A decoy. Because Rob had a collection of antique blades, medieval replicas, displayed in his study. After the murder, 2 were missing. Only 1 was ever found. And the other? Still unaccounted for. Nick's arrest, too easy? Nick was found in the guest house, sitting calmly on the edge of his bed. When the police entered, he didn't resist. Didn't run. He was bleeding slightly from his hand. A cut he couldn't explain. But the blood didn't match either parent. It was his own. Self-inflicted? Or from something else? His only words to the officers? I didn't do it. But I knew it would happen. They cuffed him anyway. Because that's how the story was written. The troubled son. The history of addiction. The motive handed to them in a neat, tragic bow. Case closed? Not even close. The one clue left behind. The next day, as investigators combed through the property, the maid found something wedged behind the portrait in Rob's study. A note. Not handwritten. Typed. On old parchment paper. It read, "Every director thinks he controls the ending." But this time, the script changed. No signature. Just a symbol. a triangle with an eye in the center, drawn in red ink. It wasn't the first time that symbol appeared in the house, and it wouldn't be the last, because someone had rewritten the third act of Rob Reiner's life. And they weren't done yet, because just as Romy thought the nightmare was over, she found a second journal. And this one wasn't written by Michelle. It was written by Nick.